Okay, and now I would like to introduce our speaker today. We have Andy Kadlec from Thistle, and Andy attended Minnesota State University, and he is a bilingual education provider, and he is a nonprofit program director, which he is the program director at Thistle. So Thistle is a private nonprofit organization that is part of the heart and soul of Boulder County. Thistle develops, manages, and preserves quality, permanently affordable rental and ownership homes in Boulder County. And with that, I would like to welcome Andy. Thank you, Andy.
Hey, Sally, thanks so much for the great invite. I almost want you to do the presentation. You've made me sound so great already. But I want to also thank Marcia Sprague for the invite and tell me about the opportunity to speak with Boulder Rotary today. I'm really happy to be here. As Sally mentioned, my name is Andy Kadlec, and I am Thistle Rock's program director. I've been working with Thistle here in Colorado for about 6 years. And so I just wanted to speak a little bit to you all today about Thistle Rock in our resident-owned community program, how we work with the nationwide nonprofit Rock USA, their history and background over preserving affordable housing for residents in manufactured parks across the country, as well as a little bit of a preview over manufactured housing in Colorado and what we're doing to help preserve affordability with residents in manufactured housing parks. For those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Thistle, we are an affordable housing nonprofit that's been based in Boulder since 1985, and Sally did a great overview over our portfolio. Historically, we've worked with affordable rentals and home ownership opportunities. And our most recent program is the program that I am leading right now, which is called our Thistle Rock program. You'll hear me say rock a lot, stands for resident-owned communities. So, and I might use a few puns with that. So just please laugh if it sounded like it was supposed to be a joke. I appreciate that. Thistle is a network affiliate of the Rock USA program. Rock USA, resident-owned communities, is based in New Hampshire and really has its history that goes all the way back to around 1985 in New Hampshire with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is one of the first CDFIs in the country. If you're not sure what a CDFI is, it is a community development financial institution. We like to simply explain to it as a nonprofit bank that has intentions on helping low-income people across the country. And there's a small trailer park in New Hampshire called the Meredith Trailer Park. It was about 13 units, and the owners of the park, which historically we've seen are, an older couple that maybe created the park in the 50s or 60s and have owned it for decades and were ready to sell. And weren't really sure what to do with the park. Those 13 residents in the community really wanted to preserve their housing because they heard that there was a buyer that was maybe interested in purchasing this park and changing the use of the park to apartments or something else. These residents living in this Meredith Trailer Park didn't have the funds to be able to purchase this community, which is about $40-some thousand at the time, and reached out to the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and eventually were able to secure some financing from the Sisters of Mercy to help secure a loan and purchase their park. And they purchased it as a cooperative and were essentially the first resident-owned cooperative under this model in the country. Since then, things have really skyrocketed. There are now currently 267 resident-owned communities under this model across the country. We're in about 18 states right now, and we're rapidly expanding into California, other parts of the Southeast. We've preserved over 18,000 homes under this resident ownership model. And I think, our record so far is 267-0. There has not so far been a community that has failed under this model. And so I think I don't know a lot of businesses or anybody who has a 267-0 record. So I think that's pretty darn good. Thistle Rock partnered with the Rock USA program about 2.5 years ago. And we have been working in the state of Colorado since then to really expand the program, work on creating relationships with local government and local organizations, as well as start the process of preserving communities. To date, we have helped preserve 5 different manufactured housing parks in the state under 3 different cooperative rocks. 2 of those are down in Canyon City, Fremont County area. They are called the Rocky Mountain Homeowners Co-op and the River Maze Co-op. We have about 80-some homes that are preserved under those 2 cooperatives. And then the third one's up in Boulder County in Longmont, just off 15th and Main. It's called the LMP Co-op, and there are 36 homes there that we have preserved. So the question we have to get is, what is a ROC? How does the ownership work, and how do we help these residents secure financing to purchase their park? And so in a resident-owned community, homeowners essentially form a nonprofit business called a cooperative, or legally a cooperative corporation. Each household or member that lives in the park and owns their home has a right to join this cooperative and be a part of the leadership and management of this community. Thistle Rock is a partner that brings these resources to them to help them organize, form a cooperative, take all those appropriate steps in creating that legal entity, and then eventually secure financing with a nonprofit lender and purchase their park. The members would continue to own their homes as they currently do. In a mobile home park, it's kind of a unique model where typically you own your home, but you don't own the land underneath your home. And so there's often a lot of, disadvantages with that in terms of rights over rules and regulations in those communities. So in this model, we're helping these residents create that cooperative where the residents are the individuals who own the communities, who create the rules, who decide, what happens and how the money is spent in their community. Some of the main benefits that come about through this are, number one, which is clearly the control of their own lot rent and the control of any community repairs or infrastructure needs or improvements that need to be done in the park. If you live in a manufactured housing park and you have a corporate owner that owns the park, you really have no voice over what they do with the money and how they spend that money in your community. In this process, we're really keeping all the funds in the park, in their community, in their area, so they can choose to make those improvements, to make a park for the kids in the park, to do what they need to preserve that community and keep it affordable. So really it's about control of that monthly lot rent and really preservation of the housing where it exists. In the state of Colorado, there are close to 900 different mobile home parks that encompass more than 100,000 Coloradans that live in these communities. Oftentimes you see a lot of these parks are scared that their communities may be sold and redeveloped into market rate condos, into commercial, property, something like that. Under our model, we're helping these residents preserve their community perpetually under the model of the housing where it's at. And so we're really giving them preservation and stability so that these residents understand that the park won't be sold. They won't have a new owner come around who can create new rules and maybe push people out or evict them because they feel like they want to. And they have the ability to really plan for the future in a much more stable way. They can invest in their home, they can make improvements, or they can save money for something else. We also really see a big strength of this program is that we are helping to create leaders in these communities that maybe haven't had the opportunity to be in a board of directors, to serve as a treasurer, to be a leader and lead an organization or a community and help create budgets and just create these experiences where they can be involved and help control the process of their community. And so it does require a lot of work and volunteerism from the residents. We always want to make sure they're aware that, we're here to help and they're the ones that need to do it. We provide the expertise, we provide the guidance and the training, but when it comes down to it, the residents and the communities are the ones that must make those decisions, that must be the leaders, that must work with us to meet that process and move forward. When it comes to purchasing these parks, that's often a big question we get is, how do we afford to get financing for these communities? Thistle Rock partners with Rock Capital, a CDFI based out of New Hampshire that has the explicit purpose of lending to these types of cooperative corporations. We're able to provide a really unique model of financing to these residents where they're able to borrow up to 110% of the value of the community to pay for the purchase price, to pay for closing costs, to pay for engineering reporting, and all of that associated due diligence that typically goes about when you're purchasing a property. This really gives the residents the opportunity to not have to reach into their pocket and put a down payment down when they're purchasing their park. I don't know if anybody here has ever, purchased a home recently, but has anyone ever been able to find a bank where they will give you 110% of the value to purchase, where you don't have to pull anything out of your pocket? It's a really unique model because we have that intention of preservation of those communities and maintaining the affordability. And so, you know, and part of the reason how that works is that they're partnered with an organization like Thistle, who has that historical experience in understanding the real estate market, in understanding property management, maintenance, you know, helping them guide through infrastructure problems that may arise, and that, you know, very foreign, you know, environment of the manufactured housing industry and how those players work. Most recently, we have started, you know, we have seen the landscape of manufactured housing in Colorado really change. I want to share an article in the chat from the Colorado Sun that I really recommend people taking a few minutes to read. They've done some great pieces on manufactured housing in Colorado. And just this week, they posted an article about this new legislation that just came into effect in 2020 called Opportunity to Purchase. Essentially, what this legislation does is it gives residents in manufactured housing parks the right to have the opportunity to purchase their park if it comes for sale. If an owner is intending on changing the use of the park or selling to another owner, they must give residents in that community a 90-day time period in which they have the right to organize and assess whether it's something they want to assume, whether they want to become a cooperative or find a way to secure financing and purchase their park. As I'm sure everybody knows here, being a part of Boulder Rotary, you know, housing costs are pretty crazy here in Boulder County, as well as across the country, and, you know, essentially across the state of Colorado. And so we're really seeing a lot of interest and increase in property values in these manufactured housing parks, where there's a huge consolidation of the industry. You know, 10 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, you would see that a fair percentage of owners of manufactured housing parks were individuals. You know, they were the mom and pops that maybe built the park back in the day, or their children who assumed the management and ownership of that park and really ran it as a community for the people that lived there. They may have lived in the park next to their neighbors, and they saw it as more than just a piece of real estate that they were making money off of. They saw it as their neighborhood and their community that they wanted to be a part of. But more recently, we're seeing that there is a huge focus from more, you know, larger nationwide, you know, real estate developers and individuals who maybe have an interest in investing in these parks, because they see that there's an opportunity to, number one, buy out these older owners, consolidate their portfolio, and have the ability to really make a lot of money off of these communities. Owning a mobile home park as a corporate owner, as a landlord, you know, it's a lot different than owning an apartment complex or condos or something like that. You have no responsibility over the management or maintenance of those homes, only the land and the infrastructure beneath it. And so there's a lot of, you know, power there, where we see there's oftentimes, and not always, because there are a lot of great larger owners out there in the country, but sometimes we see that there are individuals who like to take advantage of it and really find a way to maximize their profit by raising the rents on these residents. And if any of you have driven by a mobile home park recently, you've probably seen that a lot of them are starting to become aged and have homes in those communities that have been there for, you know, 30, 40, 50 plus years, where some of these homes cannot be moved, and really, you know, just there isn't a lot more you can do with them other than maintain their current use. And so, you know, if you're a resident who lives in a manufactured housing park and your rents are going up and you can't afford it, you know, the opportunity to pick up your home and move it doesn't exist as much as it maybe did 20 or 30 years ago. And so what we're really trying to do with this program is find those communities where residents are, you know, at risk of housing redevelopment, of increased rents, and really, number one, be a competitive buyer. We're helping these residents organize in a professional way and secure financing where they can actually submit a market rate offer to the owners and say, listen, you know, we're working with this nationwide group that has the expertise and really has the ability to close on these communities and give you market rate for your park, while at the same time setting up a model where these residents see that their rent isn't going to increase as much as it would year after year. They have the control, they have the power to create a budget that works for them, to spend money on the things that need to be spent on, as well as now see that their home is safe where it's at, and either invest in maybe buying a new home and bringing it into the park, or maybe making upgrades or, you know, improvements to the home where it sits. And so, so yeah, I mean, that's really what Thistle Rock does. And we've been really excited to work in the state of Colorado, because as I mentioned earlier, we're all seeing the effect that even COVID has on the market, on the increase in property value, not only in Boulder, but as well as in a lot of these mountain communities where maybe there isn't that huge housing stock for residents that live in that area. If you live in Basalt or Aspen, in the Roaring Fork Valley, and you're the individual that maybe works at that gas station or is the teacher or the policeman that helps protect and educate your community, you probably don't have $3 or $4 million to buy one of those homes that are for sale in the Aspen Valley. And if you lose your housing and have to move, there just really isn't the opportunity to find that house next door or rent something, down the road. So we really see that a lot of these communities, not only in the Front Range, but in mountain areas that see a huge impact and increase in, maybe second home buyers or individuals that really want to, work remotely and live in the mountains, that it's potentially threatening some of the ability for those people that have been there for years, that maybe don't have the opportunity to triple or quadruple their salary to afford a home in that area. We want to keep them where they are and keep them working in their community. And so yeah, that's kind of my brief overview over Thistle Rock and what we're doing in the state of Colorado. Encourage you to read that article on the Colorado Sun, and they have a lot of other great articles about manufactured housing in the state. But we're really here, and we're excited about working with communities in Boulder County, especially. I mean, this is our home. I live in Boulder, and I actually live in affordable housing in Boulder as well. But we're really excited about preserving housing here as well as across the states.
Andy, thank you so much. My name is Bill Anderson. I'm going to be helping moderate the questions for you. We've got several from the group, and certainly one of our favorite question askers can start. John Hockey has a question for you.
Okay. Thank you, Andy, for your presentation. And as a longtime attorney in the community and one who's been involved in the housing market and has worked on affordable housing, it was exciting to hear what Thistle is doing with Rock. I was aware of that. I've got several questions, but I'm going to zero it down to just two. One is, are there specific communities in Boulder that you have identified, that you have had discussions with the existing owners about, saying, hey, if you're ever ready to sell, we're here? I mean, kind of how does that process work? And then the other thing that occurred to me is that for the owners of the homes in a park that does convert to a Rock, I would assume that the value of their property goes up immediately.
Yeah, John, great to hear your experience in affordable housing and your interests. So I'd love to chat with you more about that. But to answer your two questions, number one, we're absolutely involved in some of the local owners because of certain confidentiality agreements and the ways that we've been communicating with owners. I can't really speak specifically to any certain parks we're working with. But if you read that article on the Colorado Sun, you may be able to read between the lines and see where we may be working right now. But yeah, we're constantly, working on building our network of relationships with owners and really saying, hey, even if you don't want to sell your park right now, maybe, it's not on your plan for another 3 or 4 years. Let's have coffee, let's talk, and let me tell you about what we do and how we can help really create a legacy when you walk away from your community, where the residents will see you as sort of, more of a partner and in a benefit to you than what sometimes residents see with their landlords, where they don't always are happy about what they're doing with the community. And so we're always happy to build that. And then, yeah, your question about homes in the communities and how those values may potentially increase. We don't maybe have any explicit evidence over how a home in a Rock versus a home in a different community increases in value, but we do like to kind of play around and say the what if scenario, where if you had two homes that were of similar value in two different parks in the same community, one park is owned by the residents, the other park is owned by somebody else, which park do you see as a better investment, where that there's going to be stability in your lot rent, the ability for you to be involved, as well as the inability as well as the doubtfulness that park will be sold and developed into something else? I mean, we think that's a great, thing to look at and say, like, in my opinion, I would much rather live in a community where I can have some control and power and ability to be a leader and help make those decisions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Andy. Next up, Mr. Darrell Brown, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
I'm actually going to throw my voice and use Sally's microphone here, so hopefully that doesn't throw you off, Bill. I was going to joke around and say, you know, that you keep mentioning Iraq, but I thought this was housing in Boulder. But then I realized it was the Rock, and so, yeah, I got that, Andy, so thank you for explaining that. No, but really my serious question comes about is that I've always wondered what the funding is, and you may have hinted at this a little bit, so I apologize if I didn't get the whole thing. So how much federal, how much state, and what are your other funding sources?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it, and thanks for your humor as well. It's good to, I think, kind of keep a light environment here. We have some pretty rockin' partners when it comes to our funding, that's for sure. You know, Rock Capital, as I mentioned, is a CDFI that's based on the East Coast that really is our lead financier in this process. Behind the scenes, you know, they will partner with a lot of, you know, larger major banks and lenders, as well as local organizations like, for example, CHAFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, you know, the Colorado Health Foundation, and other local agencies. We're always looking and interested in finding different CDFIs, local lenders that maybe have a line of money, you know, that they want to lend and maybe bring into that model and sit on as a subordinate, you know, financier in that process. For us, it's, you know, we're still pretty new in working on developing more intimate relationships with lenders locally. We're always excited to find people locally who want to help and maybe invest in that. But we also have found that, you know, the state of Colorado has been helpful in awarding grants from DOH to help pay for maybe not always, you know, acquisition costs, but with manufactured housing parks, often there is, you know, infrastructure that needs to be addressed, you know, work on the water and sewer lines and the roads and maybe electrical. And so DOH has been a partner on a few of our deals where they have, you know, awarded a grant to the communities to help pay for that infrastructure after purchase as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Next up, we have John Rieger. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks for coming. Manufactured housing in some situations just doesn't have the longevity and the durability of some other structures through the years. And with each party responsible for their own maintenance, the community, I know, has some power, but it would perhaps be a challenge for the community to deal with appropriate maintenance and eventual replacement issues. Could you address that?
Yeah, you know, I would maybe push back a little bit on that, John, and tell you that, you know, these days, you know, new manufactured housing that's being developed is, you know, as safe and efficient and maybe even more than stick-built housing that exists, you know, outside. If you think of, you know, building or creating a home in a controlled warehouse environment where you don't have to deal with weather or other situations like that. I mean, these days, the manufacturers that are building manufactured homes are building them incredibly efficient, incredibly reasonable, and they last for a really long time. Some of those older communities, though, and those older parks, older homes, yeah, you know, there's some issues there. There are state statutes where if your home is of a certain age, it isn't allowed to be moved because of, you know, certain materials that have been used with those homes at the time. But you know, as a reminder, you know, our model of ownership under the Rock is that they own the home, they own the land, not the homes. The homes are always the responsibility of those homeowners. But under this model, we're also able to open up relationships where we can bring about opportunities for those residents to maybe partner with local builders to work to find financing for these manufactured homes. Because, you know, if you're buying a new manufactured home, you can't always access the same type of financing that you can if you're buying a single family stick built. And so, you know, we're working on finding different opportunities to open that up so that residents can really, you know, they can access more reasonable financing and help, you know, create situations where they're able to replace homes and do repairs down the road. There's a lot of great resources with local counties where they have kind of weatherization programs that really can help create, really update older homes with more efficient heating, cooling, insulation, and windows that really can extend the life of those homes.
Thanks. Next up, Ronnie Wells has a question. Ronnie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. It's wonderful. For about 10 years, we lived next to the Mapleton Park in Boulder. And several things struck me. One is the pride of ownership in that particular park. And we have a number of friends who live there still. Secondly, the owners of the park was the city of Boulder, and they told us the city of Boulder has leased that land for 100 years. We would never lose our view over the big part to the Flatirons because they couldn't change the rules. They had the city of Boulder behind them, and I found that fascinating. And I don't think the city of Boulder is the same as a for-profit organization that might own a piece of land that has manufactured homes. Can you comment on that?
Well, absolutely. First, I'll let you know that, the city of Boulder is heavily involved in the Mapleton Park, but Thistle actually is the owner. We own the land under a different model called a community land trust model. And, if we had the time to discuss that, I'd be happy to get into that.
Okay,
but,
so it is the city of Boulder through an organization.
Yeah. So Thistle Rock owns it. And, currently we're actually in the process of helping them do some pretty serious, updates of their infrastructure. But this is one of many models that helps preserve affordability. And, the thing I like about working for a nonprofit is that I can be honest and say that, as long as we're finding preservation of housing in a certain way, it's fine if it's not under my model. I love to see, different ways of that being done. And that Mapleton Park is such a beautiful park. It's in such a great part of the city. And, we're dedicated to preserving it. And maybe hopefully someday we can find a way to turn it into a more direct ownership model under our model.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Bill Rubin. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, Andy. Just a little word. I was on the board of Thistle many years ago, and it's really nice to see that how things are changing and what kinds of ways that that are coming up to offer these kinds of options to folks. I want you to just speak a little bit about the process for ownership and reselling, income qualification to own and live, whether you can own a property in there and be renting it to others, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Great question, and great to meet you, Bill, and see that connection there. The ownership model of ROC is once again the ownership of the land and the infrastructure beneath the homes. We always want to make sure residents know that we aren't purchasing your homes. Your home is your home, and you have the right to sell your home however you see fit. Under the traditional model of you want to sell your home for $5 million, hey, if you can find someone to buy for $5 million, have at it. That's good for you. We see that just traditionally though, lower income individuals tend to live in manufactured housing parks, and we want to preserve the housing for people that live and work in that community. And so, one of the aspects of our requirements is that, renting of homes in the park is not allowed. We see that as just a situation that, maybe initially doesn't seem like a big deal, but, if you would take a park in Boulder and, put under this ROC model and let residents rent their homes in 10 years, who knows how valuable those homes may be and how much they could rent those homes for, and we're not in the market of creating opportunities for people to rent homes. We're in the market of finding housing for people that live and work in their community and want to live and work in their community.
Super. Andy, I'm going to hop in and ask you a question myself. So I'm a lawyer, and I actually do some fair housing litigation. My law firm does. And I'll tell you, I was approached about a case last year because of some of the aggressive tactics that some venture capital firms that have taken in sort of swooping in and picking up these communities and charging massive rent hikes that the residents can't afford. And ultimately, we didn't end up pursuing that particular litigation, but I do see it as a pretty significant problem. And I wonder if you could speak to whether there are times where you've had competition going in, and how some of those corporate interests that have gone in and sort of yanked up the rent levels, how that's affected those communities. And if you could
Definitely. Yeah, great question. And you really have hit kind of the current market on the nose right there with what's going on. Consolidation, these larger, firms that are coming in and buying portfolios of parks for high amounts of dollars because they can, and they see the investment and the income potential down the road. And that's where it's difficult, as a nonprofit, as that smaller, as the David versus the Goliath, we maybe don't always have those resources initially that those larger communities or those larger organizations have. But we're fortunate with this opportunity to purchase legislation that we're kind of getting there. That legislation, although it's not a direct right to purchase, the owners don't have to sell to the residents. It still at least, opens a seat at the table for the residents to sit down and have that conversation. And so, what we're really trying to do to kind of catch up with the industry and that aspect is really expand our opportunity to find other partners and individuals who can help maybe bring some lower interest money to the table to help make that happen. And, but it's unfortunate, the market is the market, and, people have the right to sell their parks for however much they want to sell it for. And if there's a buyer out there that's going to buy it, we'll do our best to, put our financing package together and present it to the residents and really have it be the residents' decisions. Maybe it's not always the right decision if a park is being purchased for millions of dollars and the rent increase that it would cost the residents to purchase the park would be just, too astronomical. It's really tough to see that happen sometimes, but we're at least trying to get them a seat at the table and help them understand what their rights are. And so it definitely is an uphill battle right now, working with some of that consolidation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Next up, I believe we have Marcia Sprague. Will you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Marcia.
So I was wondering if you could share what you think it is about the ROC model. You said it was 267 to 0. So what is it about the ROC model that it has allowed no ROC to ever fail in 37 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for those of you that don't know, Marcia does work with us and help support some of our ROC communities in Colorado. So it's great to see a familiar face. And thanks for all your hard work, Marcia. But I think, you probably know the answer to this a little bit as well, but it's just the network that we have built together, the resources that, Thistle has and our investment in preserving these communities. I mean, if you would put the residents off on their own and have them try to figure all this out on their own, I think it would be a little bit of a different scenario. But we help create a model and create a method of ownership where there are a lot of safety nets. We're helping create a fiscally responsible budget that puts money aside every single month for capital improvement needs, a debt service account so that when things go bad, they have money to lean back on, as well as just, the network as a whole, working with the ROC network, opens those residents up to funding opportunities and support that they maybe traditionally wouldn't have gotten or wouldn't have even been aware of, being on their own in that community. And so I really have to hand it to the ROC program and how they really developed a very, specific, kind of limited scope type of program where, sometimes we have residents that are frustrated because they have to do it a certain way. They can't rent their homes out in their park, or they can't do this. Well, we found that there are reasons why, and we really need to focus on kind of following this model the way we have it prepared, because it's been proven to be, effective and successful throughout the years.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up, Bob Stunkel. Bob, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Andy. I'm remembering talking extensively with Kurt Fernhaber, our current Director of Housing and Human Services, in the mid-'80s when he was with Thistle early in his career, and being intrigued also by the whole community model. I'm wondering if as program director, your position involves development of additional Thistle Rock communities, or do you also work in community and program development intentionally within the existing communities?
Yeah, Robert, yeah, thanks for the question. I'm glad to hear of another Thistleonian that's maybe on this call here or familiar with that, with Bill as well. You know, so, you know, the Thistle Rock program that I manage or direct with Thistle is really about the development and creation of new rocks based off of current, you know, manufactured housing communities in the market. So, you know, we aren't maybe doing development in the sense of, you know, buying a plot of land and building these new communities up. That's maybe something down the road that we would love to look into. But for now, it's really about, you know, it's about continuing this model, you know, creating a larger portfolio of communities that are owned by residents that work with us. And then within that, you know, give them training, give them opportunities to work together and collaborate with other organizations or other communities in the area, as well as, you know, provide opportunities for maybe, you know, grants to help them, you know, beatify their park or bring a new home in or something like that. And so we're really about finding any opportunity we can to bring, you know, more education and more stability to those communities.
Thank you. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Andy. Next up, we've got Meryl Glustrom. Oh, wait, I take that back. Cassidy Murphy, will you unmute and ask your question? After that, we'll have Meryl.
Thanks, Bill. Andy, thank you so much for talking about this. This is remarkably interesting, and I know affordable housing in Boulder is such a huge issue in particular. I'm sure all around Colorado as well. I'm also wondering about the tiny home movement. I know that they're building tiny homes all over here in Boulder and in Lyons and that sort of thing. I know that they also face a lot of the same types of issues regarding zoning that manufactured homes do. I'm wondering if they're going to be having the same issues long term, and is it part of what you are thinking about at Thistle?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cassidy. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, tiny homes are, you know, there are communities of tiny homes that you would traditionally see as a manufactured housing park that exists. There's one I can think of in Woodland Park, if anybody knows where that is, just northwest of Colorado Springs. There's I believe it's an entirely tiny home community that was built there. And they aren't that much different than manufactured homes. I mean, they're maybe built in a different fashion and actually maybe not quite up to the same standards or requirements that a mobile home would be built to. But when it comes to zoning, that's such a difficult question. You know, we're looking at, you know, there aren't as many manufactured home communities that are being built brand new these days. You know, when they are, they're typically underneath that MH zoning designation, depending on the county or the city they're in. But in a lot of areas, yeah, we're coming across finding communities where they're zoned commercial, they're zoned residential, they're zoned agricultural, they're kind of zoned all over the place when they were built. And I think, you know, better unification over, you know, communication between counties and municipalities over understanding what that does and how that's good for preservation is helpful. You know, a tiny home or a mobile home versus a mobile home community or tiny home community are kind of two different things. And I'm maybe not as up to speed on some of the struggles of maybe individuals who are trying to put a tiny home in on a plot of land in the middle of town and what those struggles are versus the more community aspect of that. But, you know, we do come across communities that are kind of mixed use too. I mean, there's some mobile homes, there's some tiny homes, and, you know, we definitely find a way to make that work if all the numbers make sense and the way the community looks makes sense. I think it's another great form of housing.
Thanks, Andy. Next up, after teasing him, Meryl.
Thank you much, Bill. Appreciate it.
I needed this.
Thanks for speaking to the club, Andy. What I'm wondering about utilities and how they're handled in the parks, especially as the insulation in the older homes is not likely to be adequate. Are there any city mechanisms to help residents insulate their homes or finance things like solar gardens to help out?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Meryl. And how utilities are handled on the billing side of things first, and then we can maybe talk about, you know, efficiency with the homes. And that kind of depends on every community. If we approach a community that has utilities being built out in a certain form or process, you know, it's about the resident's decision whether they want to either, you know, maybe if they were paying their own water and their own sewer and their own trash and they wanted to lump it all into their lot rent, you know, we find a way to make that work for them. And so the individual billing can kind of depend on community by community. But in terms of helping them, like you said, improve the efficiency and insulation of those homes, every community kind of has a different opportunity. You know, for example, the city of Longmont has a program that is specifically dedicated towards helping residents in manufactured homes make those efficiency upgrades. You know, it's called a weatherization program. And there are programs across the state that also do that similar model where they can either, you know, offer free upgrades or updates to your home to maybe bring in better insulation, better windows, you know, maybe a more efficient water heater or you know, electric heating element. And so that's kind of on a community by community basis, but there are some, you know, nationwide partners. Excel has a branch where they use kind of a branch of business where they work with weatherization across the state. So there are definitely opportunities out there, but it kind of just depends on where you're living and what your local energy provider as well as local government can provide.
Yeah, we're working with an organization called Grid Alternatives, and the virus, of course, has put a stop to it, but it enables us to construct solar gardens for low-income homes. So they don't have to have rooftop solar, but they get the advantages of solar nonetheless. So let's talk about that at some point.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And you know, there's another rock somewhere on the East Coast. I forget specifically where it was, but this community had been established for a while and actually had some vacant land that they developed into, you know, a solar field. And so they, you know, were able to raise some financing, and I forget exactly how it worked, but you know, they have their own solar power on the property, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's exactly what we have planned to do through the club. Near the fire station in North Boulder.
Beautiful.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to speak more about that, Meryl, sometime. So
thanks everybody for the wonderful questions. And Andy, thanks for answering all of them. We're drawing to a close here, and we have Alessandro Sachs to be Boulder Rotary Club's responder today.
Dear Andy, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today about the very impressive and needed activities of the nonprofit Thistle. Yes, indeed, affordable housing and access to vaccines more needed than ever. Rotary has been working to eradicate polio for more than 35 years. Rotary launched Polio Plus in 1985 and was founding member of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative in 1988. Through decades of commitment and work by Rotarians and our partners, more than 2.5 billion children have received the oral polio vaccine. We have reduced polio cases by 99.9% since our first project to vaccinate children in the Philippines in 1979. Polio is left in only 2 countries, and we are this close to eradicating polio. Dear Andy, in your name, Boulder Rotary is donating 100 doses of polio vaccine. Thank you from our hearts.
That's so sweet. Thank you so much. Yeah. I feel honored and grateful for the opportunity to share what I do, and thank you so much for your time and your great questions as well. It's great to be introduced to another organization that just has the best interest of the community as a whole, you know, in the front. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. We are definitely all about service above self, and that sounds like exactly what you do as well. And we really appreciate you being here today, and want to thank you for all your time and for preparing and answering all our questions. And I would like to thank Marcia Sprague for bringing you to us. And thank you, Alessandro, for your wonderful words and really great program. Thank you.